everybody. We are here to tell a story. I have Dominick Astorino here. He is a funeral director and embalmer here in Michigan with me. Dominick is also a professor at Wayne State and Worsham Mortuary schools. He recently, when did you go? You just went to Kenya to teach embalming skills in Kenya. When was that?
Yeah, that was mid-February, and I remember that you helped me with that by putting
Posting
together
a
a pretty cool
video.
little montage and sharing it. So thank you. And
Yeah.
I know you have a lot of people that follow your channel. So if you're one of those people that watched and that encourage you to support or share positive words, thank you very much, because the trip was a great success.
Yeah, we'll have to do a video talking about the trip soon.
Anytime.
Yeah, that would be good. So the reason we're here today to do a video, someone had asked me in one of my coffee chats if I had ever buried an individual who had been killed in action or a POW that had never been found or missing in action, and then brought them back for burial years and years later. And I have never handled that situation, but I knew that Dominick had. And so I sent him a message right after I got off that coffee chat and said, hey, you did this, right? If I remember, could you come share your story? So tell me, how did this all begin? Was there a phone call? Did somebody stop in the funeral home? Like, how did this all start for you?
No, I got a phone call from a man named Ken who lives in Florida, and he's the only surviving next of kin of this Marine who had been missing in action, KIA. And this Marine who died, his mother was the sister of this man's mom. So I don't know if maybe that's too confusing. This was his uncle who died long before this man was born. And when his remains were found in the South Pacific, the U.S. government notified the next of kin, as they do, and he was it. And this man's in his probably mid to late 70s now. So they called him. He lives down in Florida. He knew that his mother and her family, including her brother who had passed away in the war, were from the Detroit area. And the government basically told him, you make the decision on who you want to use for the service. And he just told me he did a little bit of digging. But our firm is pretty big, high volume in Detroit, and because of that, we've probably handled 12 to 15 killed in actions, unfortunately, from the conflict over in the Middle East. And I think that he got word of that, so he just called, and it was very matter of fact. He said my uncle was a Marine that was supposedly killed in World War II, and he was just found, and I need some help. I need to know what to do. This is what I want to have him sent and buried to the National Cemetery there in Holly, which is actually where I live. And can you help me? And that was it.
So in that beginning portion, and maybe you don't know these, like, how did they know he was an American soldier? Like, where was he found?
That's actually a really, really fascinating story. This whole process took 2 or 3 months too. So over the course of those months, I got to learn a lot and talk to a lot of people. Essentially, there's a charitable organization made up of volunteers called History Flight. And History Flight's, one of their missions is to travel the world and search for the remains of missing in action soldiers or killed in action soldiers who never came home. And these people have their own planes, they have their own pilots, they volunteer their time. And one of the biggest battles in the South Pacific Theater in World War II was on this island of Tarawa. And so they flew there because they knew that there were a lot of U.S. soldiers that were still unaccounted for. And while they were excavating there and were looking around, they needed a break. It was hot, and there's this old crumbling building. And so they went over there for some shade and get some water, eat or whatever. And they noticed in the wreckage of the building that it looked like there might be a burial ground there, which would have gone unnoticed for decades because there was a building standing on it, but now the building is in disarray. So they started to excavate that area, and they discovered several United States Marines that died in that battle, with identification, dog tags, remnants of uniforms. And so there's a whole process. Then they have to notify the Department of Defense of their suspected findings, and those remains are then excavated. And in this case, they were repatriated to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, where they were carefully examined for over a month. Anthropology experts, forensic experts, comparison of chest x-rays, radiographs, all these things. And when they positively determined that it was this man, they reached out to the next of kin, and that's when they reached out to me.
So they had dog tags, so they kind of knew potentially who these folks might be.
Yes.
Then through, like, when I wanted to be a forensic anthropologist, I went through that phase, and that was kind of a dream, was to work down in Hawaii and Pearl Harbor, because the forensic anthropologists there, that's, what they're doing is identifying and DNA testing and doing all that. And I think it's so fascinating, kind of that whole process, and that there's so many individuals that would go through there over time. So I think that's really amazing that these people go and seek and try and find these lost.
They're on a mission too. They're serious about it, and it's obviously working, because that man was finally buried with respect and with honor, and pretty much from that point forward, it was a standard killed in action case, with the coordination with myself and the government, the CAO, Casualty Assistance Officer, the National Cemetery, the media, the family. And thankfully I'd had ample experience with that. But that initial process, that 2 to 3 months where we're trying to figure out, is this legit? How is he going to get here? All that sort of stuff. It all worked out.
Wow. So then he was flown back to Michigan on just a regular airline, or was he
Yes.
a special flight, or?
No. So a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago or so, most of our soldiers who gave their life overseas, they were being repatriated back through Dover, and then they would land at Selfridge Air Force Base here outside of Detroit. But I'd say the past 4 or 5 years, most of these flights are coming in commercial on Delta Metro Airport, and that was the case with this man. So once we had made all of the plans and talked with the family, the government and myself coordinated a flight on Delta from Honolulu to Detroit, and we actually drove with the hearse right out onto the tarmac. And you're from Michigan, so you've been to Detroit Metro. It's a big airport.
Yeah.
It's like
it's big, yeah.
Chicago or Atlanta or LaGuardia. It's big. So to go out there on the tarmac with the hearse and the state police, and it was a great experience. And you see this huge plane land, and they kept everyone on board, of course. And the first thing they did was open the cargo bay. The active duty Marines, the drill team, was there on the tarmac with us, and it was TSA had an honor team that they were the color guard with the flags and everything. And just to see the way those guys approached the aircraft and handled the casketed remains, and then carried them back to our hearse, and the whole process was pretty touching, to be honest with you. It was nice to be a part of.
I'm all like goosebumps and kind of tears in my eyes right now. Just, you've sent me pictures, so I'll include those pictures in this video that everybody can see, but it's quite powerful, just the photos of it. So I'm sure being in that moment to kind of see that all happening, and for everybody on the airplane, we hear those stories that, I was on a flight and they told us so-and-so was getting taken off, before they could deboard, that people kind of watch out the windows and see this all happening and are kind of part of that moment as well. And it's very humbling, I imagine, to them all, on the plane to see that.
Yeah, I tell you what the, I don't want to use the word best, but probably the most touching part of that whole experience was this man, Ken, the nephew, who, like I said, is in his mid-70s, never met his uncle who died when he was, I think he was 21 when he gave his life for our country. But he told me, and in fact, there's a photo, I think I sent it to you, of him and I. You can see us talking through the Marines by the hearse on the tarmac, and he's telling me that his entire life, so all 70 plus years of his life, he knew who his uncle was, because his mother never stopped talking about her brother who
Mm.
died. So when he died, she would have been around his age, maybe a teenager, and she never forgot that. And in fact, that lady, the sister, and her mother, the soldier's mom, wrote letters weekly, monthly, up until their deaths to the
Oh my
United States
gosh.
government. They never gave up. And that's what this man was telling me in this picture. He's telling me, my mom, the sister, never gave up.
Mm.
And she died in January.
Oh my gosh.
And they discovered his remains in February. And she spent 75 years writing letters and constantly keeping her brother's memory alive, so that this man who I was standing next to, who's now, 75 years old, he had never met his deceased uncle, but he knew all about him.
Mm.
And so that precise moment when we were standing on the tarmac and you could see the plane touch down, for that guy, for that man, his family's small. There is no other family. So for him, it was, again, his whole life. It was something that he heard about his whole life. And so
He got to see what nobody else was getting to see
yeah, and
from other
he's
generations.
he's going through the loss of his mother, the sister. He's still getting over that. And I think for him to be able to see this to completion, it was, I could just sense it. It was of utmost importance.
That's I mean, that's like TV movie made up sort of stuff that you can't believe it's real until you experience it, like, and hear that and go, oh my gosh, how is this even?
And that's kind of how I was, like, this kind of, maybe it's embellished a little bit, but then I saw physical copies of these letters where this soldier's mom, years after, is writing and saying, my son had this birthmark, or he walked this certain way, and I think that maybe he swam off the island to the next closest island, and he's confused, and he has amnesia because of the explosion, and can you please go check there? So it was this idea that they never got to see him. They just got this phone call that he was dead. And I talk a lot about that with what I do anyway, the seeing of our dead and how important it is.
Oh, it's so important. Yeah.
But for these people, they were able to keep him alive, at least in memory. Imagine, Kari, imagine if they hadn't done that. Imagine if the sister hadn't spent 90 years of her life talking about this man, and then the military finally finds him, and they call the only next of kin, and he's like, well, who's that? I don't know anything about that guy. But it was the exact opposite.
There would have been the importance or the gravity of the moment would have been completely gone. It would have just been, oh, okay, my uncle's coming back, I guess I'll handle this. Or
yeah, but it was the exact opposite.
That's really amazing. They always had hope. They probably always kept that little hope that maybe he was alive somewhere, or maybe, something did happen that maybe they could find him. I feel like it's kind of like a missing kid, or a missing, anybody that might be missing in your family, not just military. I think you all hold out this little piece of hope that maybe they're alive, even though you kind of give up, but you still hold on to something, I would think.
Yeah. And they, like amazing. I said, he saw it through. And when that plane landed, they They put him in our coach. We took him back with police escort to the funeral home. The Marines escorted him in to the funeral home, and he was never left unattended. 24 hours overnight, and then the next day at the scheduled time, we left in a motorcade for the Great Lakes National Cemetery.
So he was casketed when he arrived, and
he was casketed, and he was formally inspected by the Marine Corps when we arrived, and they adjusted his uniform. They adjusted his medals. I put a letter from one of the letters that the family still had. I put that in there. So it was, again, from the point that he was positively identified, it was a 100% active duty KIA situation. It made no difference that it was decades ago. It was as much pomp, as much circumstance, as much everything as you can expect would happen. So
they didn't just take all these bones and throw them in a bag and then place them in a basket.
Yeah, so the anthropologists and the mortuary affairs personnel just they go above and beyond. They don't just respectfully handle the remains and casket them, but they create a map, a skeletal map, and they highlight and they mark exactly which skeletal remains are there, or fragments of skeletal remains are present. They treat him like an actual person, with respect and with dignity. So I shouldn't say it was mind-blowing, because that's what should be done, but it was really nice to see.
So you got to see him, and you got to kind of be part of seeing all of that on the backside.
Yes.
So, and there's nothing left but skeleton.
Yes.
At that point, I get asked that a lot. What do people look like after so many years? And I mean, if he was buried right in the earth, probably with nothing, there wouldn't be much left.
Correct.
Yeah. So then you guys went to, did the family get to see him if they wanted to? Did they ask?
No, they did ask. And I am a little fuzzy on this, but I'm almost positive this is correct. I believe that his nephew wanted to see his uniform. So there's not enough skeletal remains left, obviously, to fill a uniform.
Oh, right.
So those remains are respectfully and neatly placed in the foot end of the casket. And in this case, then I think they were covered. And when we opened the lid, and you could see the full Marine uniform with the hat, the gloves, the medals, and it was all arranged by the Marines. And the nephew did get a chance to have that sort of open casket viewing and have a moment. He said a prayer with his wife, and then he asked us to close the casket, and he left for the day.
It's just beautiful. It's just so, like, those are such powerful moments. Like, that's amazing that you got to be part of that. I'm kind of jealous.
It was a real honor.
Amazing.
It was a real honor, because he could have called anyone, and I was fortunate that he called our place, and fortunate that I'm the one that
got to handle the whole thing. So then you went to Great Lakes Cemetery. I've never been to that National Cemetery. We have Fort Custer by me, so there's no reason that people traverse over to your side of the state for burial, because they just stay here. From the pictures, I mean, it's on a lake, it looks like, correct?
Yeah. So Holly, if you can't tell, it's heavily wooded and a lot of lakes, and Great Lakes National Cemetery is actually just a little bit over there. And when you enter the cemetery, it's a little awe-inspiring. They have huge sign, flags everywhere, and then their service shelters or chapels are outdoor pavilions that have the lakes and the woods on the backdrop. And when you're actually there in person and you hear, for instance, the pipes, the bagpipes or the rifle volley, those volley, they echo across the lake, and it's just really serene and really, really beautiful. It was a nice setting.
Do they have a bagpiper on staff as part of the team there at the cemetery?
No. I had called one. I have a friend of mine, me directing funerals for 20 years. I know well enough, and I just called him on his cell phone, and we were planning everything. He met us there.
Nice. And then is he buried there next to anybody at all that's a family, or, I mean,
No,
family there or anything?
no family there. I don't know the circumstances of how the family relocated out of Michigan, probably because they got sick of the winter here. Seemed like that. They don't live here anymore. And like I mentioned, it's a small family, just the one nephew, which is another thing. So for the service, there was only a nephew and his wife, but there was probably 100 people at this service,
Mm,
not counting the media. People
wow.
from different organizations, people from my local community here in Oakland County who had lost a son or a daughter in active service, or who had a son or daughter, veterans organizations. Um, we had a couple state senators, congressmen there. Um,
Wow.
it was nice. It was community support for a man who they obviously never met. They don't know his family. They don't live here anymore, but these people still acknowledge the sacrifice and the meaning of a funeral, the importance of whether you knew them or not, or you know this family, or they live here in Michigan or not, the importance of coming together as human beings to
Mm.
acknowledge a life lived and a life lost. That's what a funeral is all about, and those people did that.
Was the sister of the soldier buried in Michigan as well? Or were they?
They brought her cremated remains to Great Lakes National and had her placed in the columbarium there the same day that her brother was laid to rest.
Wow.
And how or why that decision was made, I don't know. So the family gathered there maybe an hour before our scheduled service time, and they had a committal service for this man's sister, who had just died. And they placed her in the columbarium, and then they walked over to the outdoor service pavilion on the lake, and that's when we pulled in with the motorcade and everything. When you wait to go out on the tarmac at Detroit Metro, you've got to go to a security gate, and they put bomb sniffing dogs in the hearse. They put in the cars, and so to me that was an unusual experience. I'm not used to drug dogs and bomb dogs and stuff like that, but then they take you through 2 or 3 big barbed wire security checkpoints and metal detectors for the cars, and mirrors under the cars and everything, and they bring you right out there. So to me, that was a unique perspective. That's something that most people wouldn't see. But
And you passed. You made it through. That was.
yeah.
Oh yeah, that has to be very surreal. I mean, you're going into this restricted, highly restricted area to do this thing with the military and of such honor and this big moment. And I think it's amazing that they make it such a moment, and it's not just take him out like they would, secretly after everybody's gotten off the plane, and they do it with this reverence and this formality to it. I think
that man died. That man died for us. That man died for every single person on that airplane, and the tons of people up in the terminal with pressed up against the window with their cell phone watching and putting it out on their social media. That man died for all of them too. So it's fitting that he's honored in that way. He died before most of us or any of those people were even born.
Oh, for sure.
But he still died for us. So
that's unbelievable. Such a great story. Thank you for sharing that with your little nuggets. I keep calling them little nuggets that we keep hearing and sharing. And, people want to know about these moments and things that we do that everybody doesn't get to experience in their career. Everybody doesn't get to experience in person, or even, hear the story firsthand like this. It's just reading a story in a paper or catching something online that they see about it. So it's really important, I think, to share more to that story from your personal standpoint of being the person that cared for him. I think such a great honor for you.
It really was. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Drop your questions below if you have any questions about this for Dominick, and we'll probably catch Dominick on another video talking about his adventures to Kenya to teach embalming over there and preservation. So thanks, guys, and I will see you on the next video. Bye.